They say black boys become men at 18. I became one at 19 when I discovered that Pastor Marcus Williams had stolen over $200,000 from our church's building fund while my grandmother donated her last $100 to help build God's house. My name is Kendrick Lewis, and this is the story of how I exposed a man of God who was using faith to fund his luxury lifestyle, and how I did it during Sunday service in front of the entire congregation. Mount Zion Baptist Church had been the center of our community for as long as I could remember. It was more than just a place of worship. It was where we celebrated births and mourned deaths, where we gathered for potluck dinners and community meetings, where we found support during hard times and shared joy during good times. The church building itself was old and deteriorating. Built in 1967, it had weathered decades of use and insufficient maintenance. By the time I was in high school, the problems were impossible to ignore. The roof leaked during heavy rains. The heating system barely worked in winter. The foundation had cracks that were getting worse every year. The electrical system was outdated and potentially dangerous. "We need a new building," Pastor Williams announced during a Sunday service in January 3 years ago. "The Lord has laid it on my heart that Mount Zion needs a new home worthy of His glory. But we cannot do this without the support of our faithful congregation." Pastor Marcus Williams had been leading Mount Zion for 8 years at that point. He was 48 years old, charismatic, an excellent preacher, and beloved by the congregation. When he spoke, people listened. When he asked for money, people gave. When he prayed, people felt the presence of God. "I am not going to lie to you, church," Pastor Williams continued. "Building a new sanctuary is expensive. Contractors estimate we need to raise at least $500,000 to build the kind of facility our community deserves. But I believe that with God's help and our collective sacrifice, we can make this dream a reality." The congregation erupted in applause and amens. People were excited about the possibility of a new building, a modern facility with proper heating and cooling, a sound system that worked, classrooms for Sunday school, a kitchen for community meals, and a sanctuary large enough to accommodate our growing membership. "I am asking every member of this church to make a sacrificial commitment," Pastor Williams said. "Not just to give what is comfortable, but to give what hurts. Because that is when we show God that we truly trust Him to provide." Over the following weeks, Pastor Williams preached sermon after sermon about the importance of the building fund. He talked about biblical examples of God's people building temples and tabernacles. He emphasized that giving to the church was the same as giving to God. He promised that those who gave generously would be blessed abundantly. "Sow your seed into this building fund," he would say, "and watch God multiply it back to you 100-fold. My grandmother, Sister Ruth Lewis, was one of the most faithful members of Mount Zion. She had attended the church for over 40 years, through multiple pastors and countless challenges. She was 72 years old, lived on a fixed income from Social Security, and barely had enough money to cover her rent, utilities, and medication each month. But when Pastor Williams asked the congregation to sacrifice for the building fund, Grandma was one of the first to respond. "Kendrick, baby," she told me one Sunday after service, "I am going to pledge $100 a month to the building fund." "Grandma, you do not have $100 a month to spare. You already struggle to pay your bills. The Lord will provide, baby." Pastor Williams said we need to step out in faith, and that is what I am going to do. "But Grandma, do not question my commitment to God's house, Kendrick. This church has been there for me through some of the hardest times of my life. Now it is my turn to be there for the church." I watched Grandma write a check for $100 that day, money she could not afford to give. But she did it with joy, believing she was investing in something that would serve the community for generations to come. Over the next 2 years, the building fund grew steadily. Pastor Williams provided regular updates during Sunday service, announcing the total amount raised and thanking specific donors who had made large contributions. "We have now raised $280,000 toward our goal," he announced during one service. "Praise God, we are more than halfway there. Keep sowing your seeds, church. Keep believing for the breakthrough. The congregation would cheer and clap, encouraged by the progress toward their goal. People like my grandmother continued to give sacrificially, cutting back on necessities to ensure they could make their monthly pledges to the building fund. But something started bothering me about the whole situation. The numbers did not quite add up, and Pastor Williams' lifestyle seemed increasingly inconsistent with someone who was shepherding a struggling congregation through a major fundraising campaign. I first noticed it during the summer after I graduated high school. I was working part-time at the church doing maintenance and helping with technology for the services. Part of my job involved updating the church website and managing the social media accounts. One day while scrolling through Instagram, I came across Pastor Williams' personal account. It was set to private, but I sent a follow request identifying myself as a member of the church, and he accepted. What I saw on his Instagram was shocking. Pictures of Pastor Williams on a luxury vacation in Dubai. Photos of him on a yacht in the Caribbean. Videos of him at expensive restaurants in New York and Los Angeles. Images of him wearing designer clothes and luxury watches. This was not the lifestyle of someone who was supposedly sacrificing alongside his congregation to build a new church. This was the lifestyle of someone with significant disposable income. But maybe he had family money, I told myself. Maybe he had made good investments. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation for his apparent wealth that was separate from his church salary. Then I noticed something else. The dates on some of his vacation photos corresponded with times when he had told the congregation he was away for pastoral conferences or ministerial training. The church had even collected special offerings to help cover his travel expenses for these supposed ministry trips. But based on his Instagram, these trips were not ministry-related at all. They were personal vacations to luxury destinations, funded at least partially by special offerings from people who could barely afford their own rent. I started paying closer attention to Pastor Williams' sermons about the building fund. He would often use emotional appeals to encourage people to give more. "I was praying last night," he would say, "and God told me that there are people in this sanctuary who are holding back. You have money saved up for a vacation, for a new car, for something you want but do not need. And God is saying, give that to the building fund. Show me that you trust me." After these appeals, people would come forward with extra offerings. I watched elderly women on fixed incomes write checks for $500, $1,000. I watched single mothers struggling to feed their children pledge amounts they could not afford. I watched families deplete their savings because they believed they were investing in God's kingdom. And all the while, Pastor Williams was living a lifestyle that suggested he was not making the same sacrifices he demanded from his congregation. By the time I turned 19 and started community college, I had developed skills in computer programming and network security. I was particularly interested in cybersecurity and had taken several online courses in ethical hacking and digital forensics. One day while doing maintenance work at the church, I was asked to help fix a problem with the church's financial management software. The office manager, Sister Thompson, was having trouble accessing the system and asked if I could help troubleshoot the issue. As I was working on the computer, I noticed that the financial management system had very weak security protocols. The passwords were simple and easy to guess. The system had not been updated in years and had multiple known vulnerabilities. I also noticed that the system had different levels of access for different users. Sister Thompson had basic access that allowed her to enter donations and expenses. The church treasurer, Deacon Johnson, had moderate access that allowed him to view most financial reports. And Pastor Williams had administrator access that allowed him to view everything and make transfers between accounts. I did not intend to snoop through the church finances. But as I was fixing Sister Thompson's access issue, I accidentally opened a summary report that showed the overall financial picture of the church. What I saw made my blood run cold. The building fund account showed a balance of about $290,000, consistent with what Pastor Williams had been announcing to the congregation. But there was also a detailed transaction history that showed numerous large transfers out of the building fund account into other accounts. Over the past 2 years, approximately $220,000 had been transferred from the building fund into an account labeled Pastor's Discretionary Fund. From there, the money had been withdrawn or transferred to what appeared to be Pastor Williams' personal accounts. The descriptions on these transfers were vague: ministry expenses, pastoral needs, outreach investments, administrative costs. But the amounts were significant: $5,000 here, $10,000 there, sometimes as much as $20,000 in a single transfer. I sat there staring at that computer screen, my hands shaking and my heart racing. The building fund that was supposed to have almost $300,000 actually only had about $70,000 left after Pastor Williams' transfers. He had been stealing from the fund for 2 years while asking the congregation to sacrifice and give more. I thought about Grandma writing her monthly checks for $100, money she needed for medication and food. I thought about all the other elderly members on fixed incomes who were giving sacrificially. I thought about the single mothers and struggling families who were depleting their savings because they believed they were investing in something that would serve the community. And all that money was being siphoned off by Pastor Williams to fund his luxury vacations and expensive lifestyle. I knew I needed to document what I had found before confronting anyone about it. I took screenshots of the financial reports, being careful to capture the transaction history, showing the transfers from the building fund to Pastor Williams' accounts. I also documented the dates of the transfers and cross-referenced them with his Instagram posts showing luxury vacations. The pattern was clear and damning. Every time there was a big push for building fund donations, Pastor Williams would transfer a large sum to his personal accounts shortly afterward. Every special offering collected for his ministry trips corresponded with luxury vacations documented on his social media. Over the next few weeks, I gathered as much evidence as possible. I created spreadsheets showing the correlation between building fund donations and Pastor Williams' withdrawals. I compiled a folder of his Instagram posts showing luxury purchases and vacations. I calculated that he had stolen approximately $220,000 from the building fund over 2 years. But I struggled with what to do with this information. Pastor Williams was a respected leader in our community. People trusted him with their spiritual well-being and their financial resources. Exposing him would devastate the congregation and potentially destroy the church. But letting him continue to steal from people who could not afford to be stolen from seemed even worse. I decided to talk to Grandma about what I had discovered. If anyone deserved to know the truth, it was her. One evening after dinner at her apartment, I showed her the financial documents I had compiled. "Grandma, I need to show you something about the church building fund." "What about it, baby?" "Pastor Williams has been stealing from it. He has taken over $200,000 for his personal use." I showed her the spreadsheets, the bank statements, the Instagram posts. I watched her face as she processed the information, seeing the confusion turn to shock and then to deep sadness. "Are you sure about this, Kendrick? Pastor Williams is a man of God." "I am sure, Grandma. I have documented everything. The money people donated for the building fund has been going into his personal accounts and funding luxury vacations. But he preaches such powerful sermons. He helps people. He prays for the sick. He also steals from the people who trust him. Grandma, you have given him $1,200 over the past year. Money you needed for your medication and rent. And he used it to go to Dubai." Grandma sat quietly for a long time, staring at the documents spread out on her kitchen table. "What are you going to do with this information?" she finally asked. "I am going to expose him. The congregation deserves to know the truth. Baby, be careful. Powerful people do not like being exposed. Pastor Williams has a lot of influence in this community." "I know, Grandma, but I cannot stay silent while he steals from people like you." Over the next few days, I considered different approaches to exposing Pastor Williams. I could go to the church board of directors privately and let them handle it internally. I could report the theft to the police and let the legal system deal with it. Or I could expose him publicly in front of the congregation during Sunday service. Each approach had pros and cons. Going to the board privately might allow them to cover up the scandal to protect the church's reputation. Going to the police might result in charges, but the congregation would not necessarily learn the full truth about what had been happening. I decided that the congregation deserved to know the truth directly, without any filtering or spin control from church leadership. They had given their money in good faith, believing it was going toward a worthy cause. They deserved to see exactly how that money had been misused. I spent the next week preparing a presentation. I created a PowerPoint slideshow with financial documents, bank statements, and social media posts. I calculated exactly how much money had been stolen and showed the correlation between donation drives and Pastor Williams' luxury purchases. I also prepared a short speech explaining what I had discovered and why I felt compelled to bring it to the congregation's attention. On Sunday morning, I arrived at church early and set up my laptop connected to the projection system we used for worship songs and announcements. I tested to make sure my presentation would display properly on the large screens at the front of the sanctuary. Service began normally. The choir sang. The deacons led prayers. Pastor Williams delivered announcements about upcoming church events. Everything proceeded according to the usual order of service. Then came the time for pastoral remarks, when Pastor Williams typically gave a short meditation before launching into his main sermon. Before we continue with today's message, Pastor Williams said, I want to give an update on our building fund. We are now at $305,000 toward our goal of $500,000. Praise God. We are getting closer every day. The congregation applauded and shouted amen, excited about the progress. I want to remind everyone that we are still accepting pledges and donations, Pastor Williams continued. If God has laid it on your heart to give sacrificially toward this building fund, now is the time. Do not let fear hold you back from your blessing. That was my cue. I stood up from where I was sitting in the back of the sanctuary and walked down the center aisle toward the front. Pastor Williams, I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Before we continue, there is something the congregation needs to know about the building fund. The sanctuary got very quiet. All eyes turned toward me as I walked up the steps to the pulpit area. Kendrick, what are you doing? Pastor Williams asked, looking confused and concerned. I am exposing the truth about where the building fund money has really been going. I turned to face the congregation. My hands were shaking and my voice was not as steady as I wanted it to be, but I forced myself to continue. 3 years ago, Pastor Williams asked this congregation to make sacrificial donations to build a new church facility. Many of you gave money you could not afford because you believed it was going toward a worthy cause. My grandmother donated $1,200 over the past year, money she needed for medication and rent. Kendrick, this is not appropriate, Pastor Williams said, trying to take back control. We can discuss any concerns you have in private. No, Pastor. The people who gave their money deserve to hear this in public. They deserve to see where their donations really went. I signaled to a friend who was sitting in the congregation, and he pressed play on my laptop. The first slide of my presentation appeared on the screens at the front of the sanctuary. According to church records, the building fund has received approximately $510,000 in donations over the past 3 years. The congregation murmured. That was more than they expected based on Pastor Williams' announcements. However, the current balance in the building fund account is only $72,000. The murmuring got louder. People were confused about where the other money had gone. The next slide showed a detailed breakdown of transfers from the building fund to Pastor Williams' personal accounts. Over the past 3 years, Pastor Williams has transferred approximately $220,000 from the building fund into accounts under his control. The descriptions on these transfers are vague: ministry expenses, pastoral needs, administrative costs. But I have documentation showing that these withdrawals correspond directly with luxury vacations and personal purchases. The next several slides showed side-by-side comparisons. A $15,000 withdrawal labeled Ministry Conference Expenses, next to Pastor Williams' Instagram posts from a luxury resort in the Maldives. A $20,000 withdrawal labeled Pastoral Needs, next to photos of him on a yacht in the Caribbean. A $10,000 withdrawal labeled Outreach Investment, next to pictures of him at a designer clothing store in Beverly Hills. The sanctuary erupted in angry shouts and questions. People were standing up, pointing at the screens, demanding explanations. "This is slander," Pastor Williams shouted. "This young man has hacked into private church accounts and is trying to destroy my reputation." "I have not hacked anything," I said calmly. "I was asked to fix the church's financial software, and I discovered these transactions while doing legitimate maintenance work. Everything I am showing you is documented with official bank statements and public social media posts." "Where did you get those bank statements?" Deacon Johnson asked, standing up from his seat. "They are from the church's financial management system. As treasurer, you have access to the same information. Have you been reviewing these accounts regularly?" Deacon Johnson looked uncomfortable. "Pastor Williams handles most of the financial oversight. I just review summary reports he provides." "Those summary reports do not show the full picture," I said. "They do not show the transfers from the building fund to Pastor Williams' personal accounts." The next slide showed a breakdown of how donated money had been allocated. Out of $510,000 in total donations, $220,000 transferred to Pastor Williams' accounts. $145,000 spent on legitimate church operating expenses. $73,000 lost to bank fees and bad investments. $72,000 remaining in the building fund. "Pastor Williams told you the building fund had $305,000, I said. "But the actual balance is only $72,000. He has been stealing from this church for years while asking you to sacrifice more." By now, people in the congregation were crying, shouting, and demanding answers. Several members stormed toward the pulpit, angry and betrayed. "This is absurd," Pastor Williams shouted. "I have dedicated my life to serving this church. I have worked tirelessly to build this ministry. How dare you accuse me of theft?" "Then explain the transfers," I said. "Explain the luxury vacations that correspond with building fund withdrawals. Explain how you can afford a lifestyle that your church salary could not possibly support." Pastor Williams looked around the sanctuary at the angry faces of people he had been leading and stealing from for years. He must have realized that the evidence against him was too strong to deny or explain away. I made some mistakes," he said, his voice much quieter now. "But everything I did was for the ministry. Sometimes God's work requires investments that people do not understand." "God's work does not require luxury vacations," said Sister Washington, one of the oldest members of the church. "God's work does not require designer clothes and expensive watches." "You took my grocery money and used it to buy a boat," shouted another member. "My mama gave her last $50 to this building fund while you were flying first class to Dubai," yelled someone else. The situation was getting out of control. People were moving toward Pastor Williams with anger in their eyes. Church security, 2 deacons who volunteered to keep order during services, had to step in to prevent physical confrontation. "Everyone, please calm down," Deacon Johnson said, trying to restore some order. "This is a house of God. We need to handle this situation properly." "Properly," someone shouted. "He stole from us. He lied to us. He used our faith to rob us." "I understand you are angry," Deacon Johnson said. "I am angry too, but we need to follow proper procedures. We will call an emergency board meeting to review all financial records. We will contact legal authorities if necessary. But right now, we need to remain calm." "Kendrick," Deacon Johnson said, turning to me, "do you have copies of all the documentation you just showed us?" "Yes, sir. I have printed copies and digital files." We will need those for the board meeting and for any legal proceedings. Can you provide them? Yes, sir. I can provide everything. Pastor Williams tried to speak again, but the congregation shouted him down. People who had trusted him with their spiritual guidance and their financial resources felt betrayed on the deepest level. You prayed for my sick mother while stealing from our church, Sister Rodriguez said, tears streaming down her face. How could you? You baptized my children while living in lies, said Brother Thompson. The weight of their hurt and anger was crushing. This was not just about money. It was about trust, faith, and the sacred relationship between a pastor and his congregation being violated in the most egregious way. Church security eventually escorted Pastor Williams to his office, while Deacon Johnson took control of the service. He led the congregation in prayer and promised that the board would conduct a thorough investigation and take appropriate action. As people filed out of the sanctuary that morning, many of them stopped to thank me for exposing the truth, even though the truth was painful. Thank you for having the courage to speak up, Grandma said, hugging me tightly. I am proud of you, baby. But not everyone was grateful. Some people accused me of destroying the church, of causing division, of using inappropriate methods to obtain the financial information. You should have gone through proper channels, one church member told me. You should not have exposed Pastor Williams publicly like that. What are the proper channels when the person stealing the money is the one who controls those channels? I asked. Pastor Williams had administrator access to all financial systems. He controlled what information the board saw. The only way to ensure the truth came out was to bring it directly to the congregation. Over the next few weeks, the full extent of Pastor Williams' financial misconduct became clear. The board hired a forensic accountant to review all church finances going back 5 years. The investigation revealed that the actual amount stolen was closer to $280,000 when you included not just building fund money, but also special offerings and other restricted funds. Pastor Williams had been running what amounted to a Ponzi scheme, using new donations to cover shortfalls caused by his previous theft while always staying just ahead of scrutiny. The board voted unanimously to remove Pastor Williams from his position and report his theft to law enforcement. The district attorney's office opened a criminal investigation, and Pastor Williams was eventually charged with multiple counts of embezzlement, fraud, and theft from a religious organization. He tried to defend himself by claiming the money was legitimate compensation for his pastoral services and that he had authority to use church funds as he saw fit. But the evidence was too strong, and his lavish lifestyle was impossible to justify given his stated salary. Pastor Williams ultimately pleaded guilty to reduced charges and was sentenced to 4 years in prison plus restitution of $280,000 to the church. He also lost his ministerial credentials and was barred from serving in church leadership positions in the future. The scandal devastated Mount Zion Baptist Church. Attendance dropped by almost 40% as members lost faith in the institution and struggled to trust church leadership again. Many people, especially elderly members who had given sacrificially to the building fund, felt betrayed and bitter. I do not know if I can ever trust a church again, Grandma told me one evening. If Pastor Williams could steal from us while preaching the Word of God, how do I know any pastor is trustworthy? You cannot let one bad pastor destroy your faith, Grandma. It is not just my faith in God that is shaken, baby. It is my faith in people. I believe Pastor Williams was a man of God. I trusted him with my spiritual well-being and my financial resources, and he was robbing me the whole time. The church board eventually hired an interim pastor and implemented new financial oversight procedures. All financial transactions now required approval from multiple people. The financial management system was upgraded with better security and access controls, and the board committed to publishing detailed financial reports for the congregation quarterly. But rebuilding trust took much longer than implementing new procedures. About 6 months after exposing Pastor Williams, I was asked to speak at a Sunday service about what had happened and why I made the choice to expose the theft publicly. I struggled with the decision to reveal Pastor Williams' theft during Sunday service. I told the congregation. I knew it would cause pain and division. I knew some people would be angry at me for exposing it, but I also knew that you deserved the truth. I looked out at the faces in the sanctuary, many familiar, some new, all still processing the betrayal they had experienced. My grandmother gave $1,200 to the building fund over the past year, money she needed for medication and rent. She gave it joyfully, believing she was investing in something that would serve this community for generations. Instead, that money funded Pastor Williams' vacation to Dubai. Several people in the congregation nodded, tears in their eyes as they remembered their own sacrificial giving. I could have stayed silent. I could have gone to the board privately and let them handle it quietly. I could have reported it to police and let the legal system work without the congregation ever knowing the full truth. But all of those options would have allowed people to keep giving money to a building fund that was being stolen from. Some of you have told me that I should have handled this differently, that I should have shown more respect for Pastor Williams' position, that I should have been more concerned about protecting the church's reputation. But here is what I learned. Protecting reputations is not more important than protecting people. Pastor Williams' reputation was built on lies. The church's reputation was built on deception. What I exposed was the truth, and while the truth was painful, it was also necessary. After I finished speaking, Deacon Johnson stood up to address the congregation. "Kendrick is right," he said. "As leaders of this church, we failed to provide proper oversight of the finances. We trusted Pastor Williams too much and verified his claims too little. We allowed him to operate with essentially no accountability, and he abused that trust. Moving forward, we are committed to transparency and accountability. We will publish detailed financial reports. We will have multiple people review all transactions. We will never again allow one person to have unchecked access to church funds." The recovery process was slow but steady. Mount Zion eventually gave up on the dream of building a completely new facility and instead used what remained of the building fund, plus new donations, to renovate and expand the existing building. The project cost about $150,000 and resulted in a much improved facility that served the community well. More importantly, the church emerged from the scandal with a deeper understanding of the importance of financial integrity and accountability. The painful experience of being betrayed by a trusted leader made the congregation more vigilant about oversight and more skeptical of appeals for sacrificial giving without proper transparency. For my part, I learned that exposing wrongdoing often comes with a cost. Some people never forgave me for the way I revealed Pastor Williams' theft. They felt I had been disrespectful to his position and had caused unnecessary public humiliation. But many more people thanked me for having the courage to speak up when church leaders were either unaware of the theft or unwilling to confront it. They understood that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a community is expose the lies that are destroying it from within. "Kendrick," Grandma said to me about a year after the scandal, "I need to tell you something." "What is it, Grandma?" "When you first showed me those financial documents about Pastor Williams, part of me wanted you to stay quiet. I did not want to believe that a man I trusted with my soul could steal from me. I did not want to face the reality that I had been foolish enough to give money I could not afford to someone who was using it for luxury vacations." "You were not foolish, Grandma. You were faithful. Pastor Williams was the problem, not you. I know that now. But at the time, it was easier to blame you for revealing the truth than to blame Pastor Williams for lying. I am sorry I was not more supportive when you first tried to expose what was happening. You do not need to apologize, Grandma. I understand why it was hard to believe. But I want you to know that you did the right thing. Yes, it hurt. Yes, it was embarrassing. Yes, it damaged the church's reputation. But you saved people from continuing to give money to a thief. You protected people like me from being victimized even more than we already had been. Today, I am 22 years old and studying cybersecurity at the State University. I plan to work in fraud prevention and digital forensics, using technology to expose financial crimes and protect vulnerable people from being victimized. My experience exposing Pastor Williams taught me several important lessons about truth-telling, accountability, and the responsibility that comes with having access to information others do not have. The first lesson is that religious authority does not exempt anyone from accountability. Pastor Williams used his position as a spiritual leader to manipulate people into giving sacrificially while he enriched himself. He counted on the fact that people would not question a man of God or demand to see detailed financial records. But faith does not require blind trust. Healthy religious communities have systems of accountability that ensure leaders are serving the community rather than exploiting it. The second lesson is that exposing wrongdoing is not the same as causing division. Many people accused me of dividing the church by revealing Pastor Williams' theft. But the division was caused by his theft, not by my revelation of it. I simply made visible a problem that already existed. Communities cannot heal from wounds they refuse to acknowledge. Pretending everything is fine while theft and deception continue is not unity, it is complicity. The third lesson is that protecting reputations is not more important than protecting people. Some church leaders wanted to handle Pastor Williams' theft quietly to avoid scandal. They worried about what the community would think if news got out that their pastor had been stealing. But their priority should have been protecting the congregation from continued theft, not protecting Pastor Williams or the church's reputation. The final lesson is that truth-telling often comes with a cost, but the cost of silence is higher. I lost some friendships over my decision to expose Pastor Williams publicly. Some people in the community still view me as the person who destroyed their church rather than the person who exposed a thief. But if I had stayed silent, Pastor Williams would have continued stealing. More elderly people on fixed incomes would have given money they could not afford. More families would have depleted their savings, believing they were investing in God's kingdom. The human cost of my silence would have been much higher than the social cost of speaking up. Mount Zion Baptist Church still exists today, with new leadership and stronger financial controls. The congregation is smaller but more informed about the importance of accountability. And the people who were victimized by Pastor Williams' theft have mostly recovered financially, if not entirely emotionally. Grandma still attends Mount Zion, though she is more cautious now about how she gives to the church. She no longer makes sacrificial donations without first reviewing detailed financial reports. She asks questions about how money is being used. She expects transparency from church leaders. "You taught me an important lesson, baby," she told me recently. "You taught me that faith does not mean giving up your right to accountability. I can love God and love my church while still demanding that leaders handle money with integrity." That might be the most important legacy of exposing Pastor Williams' theft. Not just that one corrupt pastor was held accountable, but that an entire congregation learned to expect integrity from their leaders and to question claims that require sacrificial giving without transparent accounting. The building fund scandal at Mount Zion was not unique. Churches across the country deal with financial misconduct by trusted leaders who exploit their spiritual authority to steal from faithful congregations. Many of these cases go unreported because people are afraid to challenge religious leaders, or because they do not have access to the financial information that would reveal the theft. I was fortunate to have the technical skills to access and understand the financial records showing Pastor Williams' theft. But more importantly, I had the courage to do something with that information rather than staying silent. That courage came from thinking about Grandma writing checks for money she needed for medication. It came from watching elderly members on fixed incomes give sacrificially because they trusted their pastor. It came from recognizing that silence would allow the theft to continue while speaking up might stop it. Sometimes being a man means having uncomfortable conversations. Sometimes it means exposing leaders who are abusing their authority. Sometimes it means choosing truth over comfort, accountability over reputation, and people over institutions. On that Sunday morning, when I walked down the aisle of Mount Zion Baptist Church and exposed Pastor Williams' theft in front of the entire congregation, I became the kind of man who refuses to stay silent when staying silent allows innocent people to be victimized. And I have never regretted that choice, even though it cost me friendships and made me unpopular in some parts of the community. Because some things are worth fighting for, even when fighting means exposing people you are supposed to respect. Some truths are worth telling, even when telling them destroys institutions you are supposed to protect. Some people are worth defending, even when defending them requires you to challenge authority. My grandmother and all the other faithful members of Mount Zion who gave sacrificially to a building fund that was being stolen from deserved to know the truth. And I am proud that I had the courage to tell them, even though the truth was painful and the process of revealing it was controversial. That is what I learned at 19 years old when I stood in front of my church and exposed a pastor who was using faith to fund fraud. That is what I carry with me as I continue to grow into the man I want to become. There are more stories like mine, guys who refused to stay silent, who broke the cycle instead of repeating it. 2 of them are right here on your screen. Click the one that speaks to your own fight. And if you want to walk with a community that knows sometimes saving your family means stopping them, tap the bell. I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.